Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Fleet Europe webinar. My name is Steven Schroefs. You see quite some people already in the room. Those are the experts that will enlighten you today about the topic that we have planned for you. The topic is how to extract value from connected car data and telematics technology. A very important topic, as fleets and fleet-based organizations are more than ever embracing new developments in connected car data and telematics technology. This to shift their business and operations from hopefully a reactive to proactive operation. In this webinar, ladies and gentlemen, you will learn a lot, and you will also have the opportunity to ask your questions to our experts. And we have the pleasure that this webinar is supported by IMS, and we are really thankful that they have chosen the topic, because we see indeed that within the international vehicle fleet industry, connectivity and telematics are two elements that need to be included in every vehicle strategy that is future-proof. So without no further ado, let me go into some quick details. First of all, a disclaimer of our organization, Fleet Europe. The webinar today is for information purposes only and is not intended as an offer. Also, you need to know that the information given is based on expertise, is based on insights, and so you should not make any investment or any other strategic decision made solely on the information given in this webinar. You should, of course, see that you have the qualified information from experts before making any business decision, with the valuable ingredients, of course, that will be shared this afternoon. This webinar, ladies and gentlemen, can't be reproduced without the permission of our organization. But the good news is that the webinar will be recorded, and that also afterwards you can relive the webinar. Secondly, we would like to emphasize that there is a competition law compliance. This Fleet Europe webinar is subject to the application of competition law, and therefore must be conducted in compliance with competition law. So any business information which is sensitive or strategically useful must not be discussed, including any reference to pricing, margins, discounts, trading terms, use of third-party suppliers, or market share. You can imagine that this can have severe consequences when you do. Now, nevertheless, it will be a very informative and engaging webinar, thanks to IMS, and I now invite their CEO, Leon Russell, to present the topic and to detail a little bit what this webinar is about, and to introduce his expert speakers. Leon, I'm going to quit this screen with my presentation so that you can already share yours.
Yep, so today it's a panel-only discussion. We won't be using any slideware today. Welcome to everybody. We are attempting to achieve a really great discussion in the space of 45 minutes. We are going to try and hold it to 45 minutes. To set the context of today's webinar, we should look back very briefly at history. So in the 90s, as an industry, we started to connect vehicles and their drivers, initially with aftermarket solutions. This was really fast followed in the early 2000s with OEM solutions embedded into vehicles. And if we fast forward to about 2018, in Europe at least, the eCall mandate means that the vast majority of new vehicles that are sold today are natively connected. And most recently, vehicle manufacturers have opened up access to the connected data that they get from these systems. Today, businesses across fleet and fleet insurance and all sorts of mobility providers, from the more traditional to the newer startups, are all using connected data. And today our exploration is specifically around business value to be achieved through connected data. I'm going to do very little talking today, which is always a great joy for me. But there are some really very experienced people that we have on the panel today. So I'm going to quickly introduce everyone. So Steve Thornton from i247, extensive experience in automotive, having first started with electric motors. Steve is the commercial director for i247, and i247 is a fleet management and a support services company, and they manage 1 million vehicles. Then we have Martin Phillips from Athlon. Martin has a very long history in manufacturers, leasing, financial services, and fleet management. Martin's currently the Chief Operating Officer for Athlon UK, and Athlon as a whole across Europe manages 400,000 drivers and vehicles. Then we've got James Taylor. James has got quite a significant amount of multi-industry experiences across commercial, marketing, and brand. In his history, he's been quite heavily involved in the BMW Drive Now service, and currently he's the general manager for Zipcar UK. And Zipcar UK have around 500,000 subscribers across 4 major UK cities. And we all know Zipcar as operating outside the UK as well, in North America and quite a swathe of other countries. Then we have Thomas Bayerl from Audi, representing a manufacturer here. Thomas has got over 20 years experience. The last 10 years have been in Audi. Currently, Thomas is leading business development for vehicle data services within Audi. And Audi ships just under 2 million vehicles annually. So what we've attempted to do today is to bring quite a few different slices of the automotive ecosystem together to have this conversation, because connected data has application across all of these different sectors. We'll attempt to do a panel-like discussion in about 30 minutes, and then we'll reserve about 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. If you have questions, can you please post your questions into the chat? That's where I'll start to pick them up, and if you've got live questions along the way. But I thought we would kick off, Thomas, with yourself. As a manufacturer, could you kind of open the floor for us and explain to us how today you're already using connected car data as a manufacturer?
For sure, Leon. First of all, I think we need to look a little bit into a modern vehicle. So when we're talking about data in a modern vehicle, some of the data are just completely hidden into the car, so they won't be available. So which is all the critical data you need to drive the car, which makes it safe and keeps it conform to all the legal regulations. Nevertheless, a car, or for example, a car or a vehicle like an Audi A8 is producing or having about 6,000 different signals available. As I already mentioned, some are accessible, or some you need as a driver, and some are just for, let me call it, engine management or whatever you want to talk about. But to differentiate into, I want to explain in 3 categories how we use the data, or how our customers can use the data. So first of all, there are for sure apps you as a customer are using to maybe control functionalities of a car. That means turning on a heater, turning on an air conditioner from a remote location. That's getting even more important when we're talking about electrical vehicles, because everybody wants to have a well-controlled climate within the vehicle, and you can do it via your phone remotely. So that's all based on information or data which a vehicle is providing to a backend system, and then being visualized on an app, for example. The second category is everything we do to do product improvement. So everything which helps us improving the products, improving the reliability of our products. And the third category is all the services which are not directly linked to services of maybe, as I mentioned, on apps. That could be safety and security services like friction. So there's a new functionality within the Audis providing the information to other Audis that the street might be slippery or wet or whatever, and that could help us improve all the safety and security features of a vehicle. So that's mainly the three categories we are talking about when we are talking about data and how we use or our customers can use the data we generate in Audis.
Super, Thomas. Thank you very much. So, Thomas, producing just under 2 million vehicles a year means that actually Martin, as a leaser, will probably have quite a few of your vehicles on stock. So, Martin, we've been locked down for almost 18 months at this stage. There's a lot of vehicles that have been reasonably immobile over that period of time, just about to re-enter daily usage. Can you give us a few views about, as a leaser, how the connected data is quite important for you and your key topics at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Leo. And Thomas, yes, plenty of Audis on our multi-mark fleet. So you're absolutely right, Leon. This is the piece for me around connected car data at the moment is focusing on one component, if I'm truthful, and that is great ODO Insight. We know that a lot of our vehicles have been parked up and they're about to start. We're starting to see them re-emerge and re-enter usage. We also know that a lot of our vehicles during lockdown had higher utilization, particularly in our light commercial fleet. And from our perspective, this period of time, this 18-month period of time, has escalated our lack of visibility in terms of the portfolio's mileage and the need for good ODO mileage to be able to manage the contracts in a more sustainable way is really important to us. Because even before COVID and the parking up, we were losing lots of touch points that we were used to using to manage the fleet. So with longer service intervals, better reliability, those touch points were vanishing. And one of the key areas that for us as we're looking at our profitability and residual value performance is to understand what the mileage on the vehicle is. And when we look at a typical fleet vehicle, 3 years, 60,000 miles with an RV forecast of £7,500, say, a 15,000 mile reduction can have a £1,200 difference positively. So in terms of managing your portfolio, that's really great. However, perversely, if you start to look at some of those larger vans in particular that may have been much busier, and you take your 85, sort of £10,500 residual value, we're seeing £800-900 difference on a vehicle that might have an additional 20,000 miles on it at the moment. So to be able to understand and to crystallize those benefits is important. And then equally to be able to make the right impairments as well in and around those vehicles that have been running longer, particularly when you start to think about SMR spend. So those servicings and maintenance spends on there, and to be able to utilize the ODO mileage to be able to make informed decisions so that you can understand when you might need to be crystallizing those spend. And then when we're working with our customers, this is really difficult for them as well, because mileage is a key component that large fleets use in terms of their replacement planning. And at this time when new vehicle availability is, there's never been a more important time to be able to understand the mileage profile of your fleet in order that you can reallocate those fleets if necessary, as I say, particularly whilst you are trying to manage this challenging time on vehicle availability. As well, for those of us with regulated customers alongside of our true fleet, to be understanding from a TCF perspective and planning mileages for those customers and this horizon planning to make sure that they're in appropriate contracts and that you're managing their contracts accordingly as well. Great ODO is the only thing that you can rely on, and hence great connectivity and telematic insight drives all of that simple planning that you need to do to manage that fleet.
So that's quite a lot of stuff, Martin. In the middle of that, you did reference quite a lot the service maintenance and repair piece. And Steve, knowing that you're coming from fleet management SMR background, and thinking of all of those Amazon deliveries we've all received over the last 18 months, uptime is quite an important aspect. Could you give us a few insights as to how the vehicle data is really effective at supporting the driver outreach and the uptime activities?
Yeah, of course. So as you'd imagine, for a fleet management specialist, uptime is enormously important to us, particularly across those LCV dedicated fleets. And naturally, connected car solutions are certainly growing in terms of the influence in our preventative maintenance solutions. However, we do have some good experience in deploying these solutions, albeit, we are certainly at the start of this journey and we're learning lots along the way. But today, how we're utilizing connected car is to capture data-driven insights, whether that's a mileage feed, an MOT expiry date, a vehicle health alert. Every single touch point is data-driven insight that supports the overall understanding of the mileage and asset condition. Now, this insight then feeds into our management platform, and once configured with rules, really allows us to monitor the intervention of what's overdue. And our system then looks to identify and combine upcoming work requirements, which then prevents further maintenance issues in the weeks and months ahead. Now, this is really quite important for us because it allows us to move away from a reactive world of fleet management to a proactive world of fleet management, whereby we're engaging with customers before there's an issue. We're really optimizing vehicle mobility and we're reducing that vehicle downtime. So for us, the connected car is so important in terms of how we're delivering some really positive outcomes for our customers.
Super. Thanks, Steve. Then with almost quite a different view on things, James, operating Zipcar and an always-on mobility fleet, you've got to address not only some of these issues that have come up already today, but ultimately your customers, I guess in my simple language, it's just walk up mobility and take the car away. Can you give us a few insights in a world which is so on demand, how data is really important in that particular space?
Yeah, sure. It's fundamental really to operations of Zipcar and any on-demand car sharing company. It actually brings you over some of the things that Tom talked about and Martin talked about. For the rental process, you're right. Member just wants to walk up and rent a vehicle as simple as possible. We need to make sure that when they're going into the app, we're recognizing that data so we can confirm it's the member that they think it is, so we know it's the right person getting into the car. Then when they're in the car, we need to collect all the vehicle status data. So is the door open? Has it been closed? Has the ignition started? So we can then start to charge them for that rental. So we know how long they've been in the booking. And then at the end of the rental, making sure that the car is locked and no windows left open again, so the car can be locked effectively and then made available for the next member to book. And I guess kind of other than data that we need, things like the odometer, we have a mileage allowance, so we need to know if people drive longer than that, and so we can charge them and generate the revenue from the booking, but also then from if they've taken the vehicle for longer. So it is really fundamental to what we're doing.
Thanks, James. I've clearly made a small misstep. I forgot to introduce Matt from IMS in the haste of trying to stick to timing. So I'm going to bring Matt in, but quickly to introduce Matt first. So Matt's got quite a significant background in data, having worked in Nielsen, but also having been quite embedded in Jaguar Land Rover's connected car program from the fairly earliest days. And he heads data solutions at IMS. Matt, lots of discussion here so far about fleet, service maintenance, OEM, and walk-up mobility. Could you give us a bit more texture as well? Because certainly I think in an insurance world, that's getting quite disrupted. There have been a lot of vehicles parked up also for the last 18 months, and this is
absolutely. And I think we've had some great insight across all of the guys here around some of the verticals where connected car data is being used. I think an avenue that hasn't necessarily been explored in the discussion so far is around how driving data can unlock potentially cheaper insurance. We've had an article that I saw in the Eye back in June that mentioned that certain car clubs, reference to James and Zipcar, are finding it increasingly difficult to secure their own insurance coverage. And even if they can, it tends to be on the expensive side. The insurance world is fairly mature in its use of connected car data, and has been using that now for probably over a decade in order to inform some of their own policy decisions. And I think as we look at some of the newer mobility verticals and how the likes of fleet management companies or SMR businesses are using connected car data today, the market's going to need to maintain access and have innovative data-driven solutions to start clarifying and mitigating some of the risks that are going to come with some of these newer mobility verticals. And it's pretty clear commercially viable insurance cover is going to be key to anybody operating within the automotive industry. And so I think the applications of this connected car data are already clear within a very mature space within the automotive world. I think also looking at some of the more common applications for connected car data today, Martin's mentioned about mileage. That's relatively in vogue from what we've had in COVID lockdowns. But it's also a very well supported a form of data from OEMs today. But I do feel that usage information and more nuanced usage information is on the horizon. So, we will have data that will enable, basic driver behavior scoring, and that's coming pretty quickly, 1 Hertz accelerometer data. And we're also enabling mobility providers then to manage risk across their fleet, and they can either price or impose terms or restrictions accordingly. If there are high risk individuals, they're going to be using some of those cars. And then if I think about vehicle health that we're tracking today, key for Steve's comments about vehicle uptime, it's not the only area that's going to bring a vehicle down for maintenance or down for repair. Crash and claims is becoming a really big factor in all of that, and making sure a vehicle, once it's been in an incident, can be brought in for the right level of repair work. And we understand the severity of any incident is really important too. And so some of the higher resolution data that we're able to achieve today certainly is going to be vital in managing a crash incident or a claims process and making sure a vehicle gets back on the road as quickly as possible.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think that gives us quite a good rounding as to how data is being used today, and Thomas, in relation to the fast accelerating availability of manufacturer data. One thing that we're all facing, we're very ensconced in at the moment, is that near future is an all electric future, and that means a variety of different things for all of us. And I was thinking, actually, if we could start, James, could an all-electric future for Zipcar is really not that far around the corner. And can you give us a bit of texture as to what your plans are and how data is critical in that part of the story?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. We've set out a vision to be fully electric by 2025. We've had EVs in our fleet since 2018. Within our flex fleet, which is our one-way model, they account for just sort of 30% of the fleet now, and that does bring its own challenges. So from a very simple perspective in terms of how much charge is in that vehicle, currently we manage all the recharging ourselves, but when we start to bring members to involve them in that charging process, being able to identify whether the vehicle is plugged in at a charge point, or is it being unplugged from the charge point? Is it plugged in at the charge point, but the rental is ended? All those kind of things from an operational perspective just add another layer of complexity and kind of another requirement for data to ensure that we can manage that fleet effectively. Because the worst thing for a member is turning up at a vehicle with low charge, and that then is ruined their trip, and it's added another layer of hassle or inconvenience. And part of the thing that we sell car sharing on is that it's hassle, it's hassle free. It's kind of the benefits of owning a car of having a car without the hassle and cost of owning one. So where you start to put more complexity in, it starts to make it more difficult from the consumer, but also more difficult from an operational side as well. And that's then where we need the data to help us kind of manage that fleet effectively.
Brilliant. Yeah, and your subscribers, are quite articulate about what they want to see in terms of the fleet. I think in Martin, your world is more complex, and the decisions get made by, fleet managers, and there's transitionary periods. So does data help to support fleets in relation to making ranging decisions as to what vehicles to range in fleets?
think it sort of builds on a number of things that James was just saying, because the biggest piece for most fleet managers at the moment with EV is to build advocacy amongst their drivers. So you might have a CSR agenda that's driving this, but you might have drivers that have concerns, be it about the natural one, which is about range. And again, that's where the use of Telematics Insight can really support in allowing drivers to bring to life what their real life requirements start to look like. So with some simple technology in the car, you can be mapping that out and taking some real life data that helps a driver be informed about the sort of journeys that they do, because we all believe that clearly we do hundreds of miles every day, and then when this is laid in front of you and you go, oh, actually I go to Sainsbury's twice a week, excellent, well done. Other supermarkets are available. So I'm sat there thinking, you know, the whole piece about the telematics brings this to life, and that advocacy happens not just in terms of what they're able to do in terms of understanding the journeys that they actually do, but the ability to then plot those journeys, like the charging infrastructure that might be in and around those journeys. Because, you know, as you start to think about your different fleet drivers, those who cannot have home charging, to absolutely understand and to bring to life to that driver, well, look, these are the journeys that you did, and we can see on these typical journeys that you do, you know, you've got a supercharger with a destination in less than a mile away from where you currently live, or these are the chargers in that infrastructure, that brings to life that this is possible, and therefore creates this broad advocacy that that is required for a fleet management company to be able to work and get that adoption within the company. And then once it's there, to Matthew's earlier point, therefore, if you do start to find some disgruntled drivers in terms of range and what they're actually delivering, I think that's when the driver behavior and all that historic knowledge that's been built up about behavior and the impact it has on driving comes to life as well, that allows you to then manage any buyer's remorse as you start to transition your fleet across.
Brilliant. And you know, still lots of work to do on advocacy, but I think there's a lot of volunteering into an all-electric future that we can see naturally occurring as well. It doesn't need to just be a push, but both are needed. There are practicalities in relation to cost and the management and the total cost of ownership, because it's a completely different architecture. You know, what's in the vehicle under the hood is quite different. Steve, obviously you need to manage vehicle fleets and service them and support your customers. Can you tell us a little bit what it looks like at the front line for you as fleets get increasingly electrified?
Yeah, certainly. I think vehicle off-road time is going to become increasingly important and complex to manage for these EV-dominated fleets. I guess some of this is to do with the challenges that the new technology presents, whether that's, you know, a new set of competencies, infrastructures, or parts required by in-life service providers. But in addition to that, like the breadth and pace of new model entrants with new evolving technology, think of autonomous and safety features. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. So it's great to see, but this new technology certainly is in its infancy. We're certainly seeing some teething issues. And with the pace of that fleet adoption across these fleets is accelerating, it does mean we're encountering perhaps more issues than we first forecast and planned. So we are seeing some issues with vehicle mobility across EV dedicated fleets. And our insight really supports this. And whilst we are seeing a drop off in servicing requirements, we've certainly seen a notable rise in the level of unscheduled service, maintenance and repair events. A really emerging trend of more warranty, more recalls being issued, and actually some part delays. So in terms of the role of connected car with vehicle mobility, you know, it's going to be really important for EV vehicles, like it is for every powertrain, particularly if we were looking to drive some really positive outcomes for our customers and our drivers.
Brilliant. And in a world, again, last 18 months, a big surge in last mile delivery and light commercial, and lots of news about light commercial getting rapidly electrified. It's quite interesting that you mentioned that the unscheduled downtime is actually creeping up in an electrified world versus the kind of a combustion engine world. And where we actually are experiencing some supply problems in terms of vehicle supply, and uptime therefore is quite critical to maximize utilization. That's an interesting combination. Thomas, Audi has an electrification plan. I think it's 30 models by 2025. Can you give us a bit of an understanding of how does the combination of moving all electric and data and Audi customers, what's important in that constellation?
For Audi, it's still the customer in the focus of all our developments or all the things we do. And when we look on electrical vehicles, it will, in our opinion, change the way of driving, but also the way of using a vehicle. Because when you look on a current combustion engine, it's something that rests in your garage. So nothing happens. If you're not in the car, it rests there, that's it. But in the future, it's also a big battery which rests in your garage. So why not using the data and the information and connect it maybe to your electrical infrastructure in your home, using the information, maybe running your fridge, your washing machine with the capacity which is stored in your vehicle. So it's more or less becoming more a part of your life or your daily doing. And when we're looking on driving this vehicle, it takes you more time to charge it. It doesn't only take you 5 minutes to get the fuel from a fuel pump in a combustion engine's tank. It takes you, even if it's a supercharger, between 15-20 minutes to charge it to 80%. So what to do during that time? That's all we want to improve, because it's all part of the customer's experience. And when you are Audi or any other premium manufacturer, the experience is still a thing we want to convince, or it's part of our DNA. And the DNA leads us to the way to convince the people to buy an Audi, or I can even maybe talk for a BMW, because it's almost the same for them. So that's the way of looking into the future and looking into the fully electrical vehicles.
Thanks, Thomas. So we started with a world today and how everybody is using and needing to use data today. We took a quick look at an electric world, a fast arriving electric world that changes some of the rules and therefore requires additional data. What I think would be quite interesting for everyone that's listening to understand is there seems to be a lot of business value to unlock across all the different verticals that we have represented here on the panel. And there's a very obvious question, which is what would unlock or accelerate wider adoption of data solutions? And the recent advent of manufacturers sharing their data in consented and properly controlled ways is really putting a lot of fuel behind this, positive electric fuel behind it. Maybe because, Matt, you sit pretty much on the head end of this daily, every minute of every day. Can you give us a bit of a view as to what are the things that are really accelerating that at the moment?
Yeah, I think it speaks very much to the last point you've just made, Leon, and links in very nicely with what Thomas has just described around electric vehicles, where there's certainly a sea change coming because of things like electric vehicles, autonomous cars, V2X connectivity. We're seeing, I'm seeing firsthand that OEMs are accelerating their own data sharing strategies as vehicles become a more ingrained part of people's lives, but also as vehicle ownership becomes more sparse and other revenue sources need to be apparent for OEMs. And so we've seen two factors here. So we've seen advances both in access to data. So that might be specific OEMs partnering with data exchanges, marketplaces, neutral servers, or even branching out by themselves in order to share data. We've seen Renault, for example, launch their Mobilize initiative and making data and service provision a core pillar of their group strategy. But on the other hand, we're seeing that OEMs are also working, and Thomas, obviously, I think this is something that was key for Audi, to enhance the resolution of that data. That could be through improved electrical architectures, that could be upgrades to telematics platforms, It could be just an internal reorganization. For example, VW Group has launched their Cariad group quite recently, which is very much focused on mobility and data sharing as a key principle, and certainly leveraging vehicles in the future to be able to share more data and more insights to drive their own product development. I think in the short term, an important area that receives a lot of my own attention and focus is privacy and consent management. I think it's been working with quite a few OEMs both to help simplify and also standardize these processes, because for the likes of Martin, Steve, James, and those that are going to be using connected car data across a multi-mark fleet, it's really important that the complexity and the barriers to access that data are quite small, because otherwise the value can become overwhelmed by operational complexity. And it's also important to note in 2021, not all cars are connected. And I think a further challenge comes from the fact that some vehicles just can't be connected today through OEM hardware. And so I've seen that the best solution is today in 2021 is to operate a hybrid solution where aftermarket telematics devices can complement OEM connected vehicles. And that way you get insight across a full fleet today in a scenario where only a portion of your vehicles are going to be connected through OEM technology. And that's the ethos we've really been driving with the IMS vehicle data exchange. But certainly there's some real sea changes coming in the approach of OEMs and their own strategies, but also the resolution and apparentness in the data. You're on mute, sorry, Liam.
Person to be caught out, have to be the one. Martin, one key part of your 400,000 vehicle fleet is absolutely multi-brand. So it has all the inherent complexities around that. How do you look at accelerants, and what gifts would you like as soon as possible for speeding up adoption and making this really simple as a leaser?
Fantastic. Early Christmas list, here I come. The reality is actually a lot of the things that Matthew was just saying, to be honest. I recall the conversations 8-10 years ago where there was lots of industry dialogue around trying to come up with a commonality of language. Thomas started the session today. I think he said there was 6,000 different signals available from the Audi product. And when you're trying to manage this big multi-mark and you're trying to unlock all of the value that is sitting within those fleets, but you're also trying to come up with a proposition for that end user that wants a multi-mark solution. And it's that complexity of an end user that wants a multi-mark solution to meet all of their different needs. They've got something at a premium end and something in the more mainstream user-chooser kind of space. That's when this complexity of having different pings and pongs coming out of everybody's vehicles, and you just need to have a mechanism, that a partner or a tool that allows a multilingual approach. And here we are on Fleet Europe as a typical Brit who can't speak any other languages. I need somebody that can do that piece that brings all of that data together so that I can have one version of the truth in a single component. Win solution, mobility solution for our customers who want this as well. So we are pushing against an open door. So it's that collaborative nature across the OEMs. There's finding those partners that can manage that vehicle data exchange. And then where there are gaps as Matthew references, finding those short-term solutions that allow a fleet to maximize those benefits as quickly as possible. And I think it's because we go to the market with lots of really interesting ideas, but it's about how do you take all of those interesting ideas and be able to come back with one that's actually executable and that you're not just always trying to boil the ocean. And as I say, something that helps solve this multilingual problem is the mechanism for me that will accelerate telematic adoptions and funkier, cooler stuff for our customers.
Brilliant. Steve, you sit in the value chain as a real pure B2B player, and how does it affect how you view data access? Because you're not directly dealing with drivers, when contracts get set up. What's important, and what would accelerate, your further adoption into this space and connected data?
Well, I think to echo Martin's thoughts there, really, mass deployment will always be really restricted, I think, until we can consolidate all these OEMs data sources into one feed with one common language, one view of the output. And I think this is perhaps one of the biggest obstacles for fleets, with particularly those with multi-makes, with sort of vehicles of various ages. I think what the fleet community is also looking for is a solution provider build this framework. In many cases, we're seeing that fleets and even outfits like ourselves, we don't have the IT competencies to deliver this on our own. And in some cases, it just won't make our top 5 things because we've already got, a crazy IT roadmap over the next 2 years. So I do think that the fleet community is looking for a provider to deliver some of this framework. But in tangent with that, I think cost is still a barrier. We do need to provide some competency across fleets that there is an ROI with some of these solutions. So I do think we need to be engaging with some of these OEMs to build perhaps some, driver use cases and case studies to really highlight that, moving into a proactive world, there is, lots of value to be unlocked. And I think the last component here that, that will unlock wider adoption of connected car across the fleet landscape in the UK at least, and one that perhaps as a community we don't really signpost too much, and that's really fleets buying into the value and importance of knowing your customer and who's driving that vehicle. And I think until that point, we're really going to struggle really delivering any proactive solution because, we won't know who inform that they've got a problem with their vehicle. So I think probably they're the top 4 or 5 key points that I would sort of focus on over the upcoming 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because if we really consider aftermarket data solutions have been in existence from the late 90s. So they've been having really long maturation period. They're very, very cost optimized today. And so any substitute or alternative, even if quality is better, has still got to kind of rationalize itself against the kind of the really mature cost structures of an aftermarket world. James, from Zipcar's perspective, understanding a little bit about how you make a standard vehicle, a Zipcar vehicle, that's quite an involved task, and that comes, I think, with some complexities for your business, complexities I think you'd like to get rid of. So could you tell us a little bit about the story about, how things could accelerate faster for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a bit like Martin said, we have different manufacturers, different vehicles within our fleet to cater to different segments of the market. So, it's a challenge this was the discovery process to make sure that all those vehicles that are available, we can make them a Zipcar vehicle by putting our aftermarket kit into it. And that's quite a lengthy process. And you can go through that process and then at the end of it find actually you can't make it work. So you kind of wasted all that time doing the discovery, and you then still can't use that vehicle within the fleet. So it kind of can limit the options that you've got. It certainly takes a longer process. And for me, this is where the enabled OEM solutions could really reduce that friction. It could reduce cost potentially over time, could certainly speed up the time taken to make a vehicle, a car share vehicle, and also open up a wider list of vehicles that could be made Zipcar compatible. And that's not just a Zipcar challenge. It's the same for all kind of car club operators. I don't think there's any that just have one vehicle type in their fleet and can consistently use that over and over again. You're looking to see what's in the market, what do our members want, what they're wanting to see, and particularly to what we said before with the move to EVs. That's then opens up that complexity as well again, that we want to kind of have that choice of vehicles within our fleet and to be able to speed up that process to make sure they will work and will operate as a car club vehicle.
Great. Then we take the next step and we really focus on the users and the drivers. Thomas, there are differing attitudes to data and data privacy across Europe and into the UK. You're the custodian of your customers and you really represent them very, very strongly. What's important for them in all of this process?
I think the key to success is to gain the customer's trust. Because I think without the trust in companies, dealing or providing data and the trust in the loyalty of the customers, you won't ever get any revenue out of it. So a car manufacturer like Audi, the customers trust in us. They rely on us, they trust in us. Though what they expect from us is to protect their data, not to hand it over to someone else. And I don't want to destroy any imaginations, but we don't vacuum data from cars and store it in big data warehouses and keep them there and keep it as the new oil or the new gold or whatever. That doesn't really happen. We don't get any data from the car unless the customer says, hey, I want to provide this data to someone. So nothing happens if the customer doesn't say, yes, I want that. So that's the main goal. And that's, for me, the key to success. Because best example is if you compare a Google or an Apple. When you look on all the ads Apple is currently running, they are all focusing the same thing. They're all focusing on gaining customers' trust, because they always say, hey, we keep your data safe. No data will ever leave your iPhone or whatever. I never saw an ad from Google telling you the same story, though that's the way companies try to gain the trust, and that's part of a marketing as well. So that needs to be part of marketing for future electrical vehicles, or even autonomous driving vehicles. It will be even more critical if you're talking about autonomous driving vehicles, because what will happen if a car is doing something which should not happen? Who is controlling that, and what's the basis of the data and all that stuff? So for me, convincing the customers of the trust, or gaining the trust of the customers, that's the key to success.
Okay, we're running a bit skinny on time, but I think there's a couple of really interesting questions that have come up. James, it has been a rather unusual 18 months. It's none of us have probably experienced anything like this, with successive lockdowns dependent on the country. What's changed in your world and kind of subscriber or member mentality, and where is on-demand mobility going, having had the experience of the last 18 months?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think trying to put a positive spin on, trying to get some positives from the past 18 months. I think one of the things that's really come to the fore with our members is experiencing what cities can be like when they're clean, when we've got good air quality and there's less vehicles on our road, which might seem strange in the context of this webinar. But I think it's changed people's habits, and we've seen a real growth in membership. I think people are looking for, they want the access to vehicles, they want to have that freedom that having a car gives them. But they're thinking of different choices, so different ways of accessing that vehicle. So car sharing is one of the ways to do that. Particularly what we've got around our EVs is, I think it's a real selling point that we can kind of help contribute to kind of improved air quality in cities by changing driver behaviour, changing how people move around our cities, but still give people the access to a vehicle when they want it.
Brilliant. Quite a practical question, Matt, and by the way, you're on mute. In terms of OBD, can you give an answer to the question, which was how open is the access to OBD? And I have a feeling you probably want to qualify the answer differently for US versus Europe.
Yeah, so I certainly think the compatibility and open access of OBD is certainly more open and transparent in the US market, particularly with new legislation as well coming down the line, like Massachusetts right for repair. Certainly there's a lot more of a standardized OBD interface that we see in the US market. In Europe, it tends to be less standardized. There are standards, but they're slightly less well conformed to. And certainly as we see electric vehicles coming down the track, as we've discussed, the applicability of some of those standards for electric vehicles also isn't conformed to get to the right level of data that's going to inform business operations. I think we can do some really simple applications using OBD today, but not necessarily go to some of the complexity that we've discussed during this session.
Okay. And Martin, Charlie has asked a question, which is in relation to maintenance coverage. How are you looking at that from a perspective of connected vehicles and the kind of OEM and other interested parties in maintenance?
Yeah, so for me, this will always be about the value that we could pull together for the customer and our end users. So the OEMs will need to be doing more than just connecting with us. They'll be needing to connect the whole value chain for us to make that SMR really work for us. So an OEM that can tell us that is happy to work with us, that says car needs servicing and this is the nearest garage, but that it can also tell me that that garage has availability on their ramps and that they can do the work that it's booked for, then absolutely, that's a really interesting proposition to build. I think the challenge is that as a lease co, one is always nervous about those, back to that multilingual component that says, I have to offer a proposition to our lease customer that's fit for purpose across all of their portfolio. And when it's a mixed portfolio, I will always want to retain control over that, but I'm delighted to work with OEMs and particularly anybody that can make this multilingual thing become simple, because that's how we just manage these vehicles. And to Steve's point earlier, that's how you manage the uptime. And the truth of the matter is, therefore, if you can have this proactive components, then we can manage maintenance spend as well, because you can avoid some of the big bills. So I think this is a thematic that we've all touched on that says if you can pull all of this data together, then it's a really compelling proposition. If you can't pull all of this data together, then clearly we'll only be able to use a small amount and only be able to tailor a proposition accordingly.
Yeah, and thus it ends up being fragmented, which is a struggle for all of us. Matt, Stephen has asked a question, which is, in the world of kind of mileage or pay-per-use insurance, what's been the evolution, what's changed over the last 12 plus months in that world?
So certainly, I think Steve's question I can see in chat is around particularly OEM connected vehicles. We've seen insurance carriers, particularly in the North American market, and certainly now for a few years in Europe, using aftermarket telematics hardware, black boxes, in order to operate mileage-based and pay-per-use insurance programs. But certainly with the advent of OEM connectivity, the options kind of explode, because some of the data points used, for example, mileage and odometer data in the same way that Martin's explored earlier, are really powerful pieces of data for an insurance company to monitor things like usage, and to manage the risk profile of someone that's operating a vehicle. So we are seeing probably insurance being probably 12 to 18 months ahead of the rest of the market in their usage of OEM connected data for some of these programs. And certainly it's a really exciting place to be in today.
Great, thank you for that. There's at least another 10 or 11 questions that we have, but I think we're starting to run, like I said, skinny on time. I'd like to probably draw to a close there. Anyone who has any further questions, there's contact information through the Fleet Europe landing page associated with this webinar. Give us the questions. We'll certainly be able to come back to you and provide sensible responses. I'd like to just wrap it and say thank you to everyone who has participated, but very especially to Thomas from Audi, James from Zipcar, Martin from Athlon UK, and Steve from I247 and Matt from IMS. Thank you very much for the time that you've taken and the really insightful dialogue.
Yes. Hello and thank you. Thank you to all the experts. I think that you shared quite some knowledge this afternoon. And in the name of Fleet Europe, I would like to thank Leon and IMS for being the host of this webinar about how connected car technology can enhance your fleet program and how you can monetize on connected car technology. It will, of course, be an exciting future. It will for sure not be the last episode where we discuss connected car technology and connected data. In fact, at the moment, we are organizing a survey about connectivity that you can also find on our website, fleeteurope.com. And there is already also in the chat box a direct link. It's only a 7-minute survey in which we are a little bit looking at what are some opportunities and challenges that you might have when implementing connected car technology. I would like to thank you very much for the participation, also to the participants for sending the questions, and we hope, of course, to see you in another episode of a Fleet Europe webinar. Why not together with these experts? Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
See you.
Thank you. Goodbye.